What made you make the jump into
A
broadcasting?
fluke. I wrote an article about Martin Snedden for North Shore Times Advertiser, and Bill Francis, who was the sports editor of this particular organisation at the time, was living on the North Shore, read the article, rang me up and said, would you mind doing a piece for Merv Smith's Breakfast? Now, we're going back pre-Paul Holmes here. I'm not exactly sure of the date, but it has to be about 1985. And before I went to school on a Friday, I would come on to 1ZB as it was then, and I would say what I thought was going to happen in sport on Merv's Breakfast Show. I was just before McCary the Spider. All right? Merv used to have a thing called McCary the Spider. And that went reasonably well, and so they asked me to come back on a Monday and to comment on it. So I've always said that my first gig on radio was to tell people what was going to happen on a Friday in Auckland sport over the weekend, and then come back on the Monday and tell them why it didn't happen. Merv Smith got moved on. Paul Holmes came in. Our ratings at ZB just didn't slightly go down. When Paul arrived, our ratings went right through the floor. We went just about right out of business. Paul took a risk. He fired everybody. I was fired along with a lot of other people. John Hart, John Dibvick and John Walker were the three other sports correspondents that Paul fired, and myself. And I did 2 days. So there's your 5 days. He got rid of the lot of us. Slowly we started to come back up and turn the corner, and people got used to Newstalk. But Paul had not told Bill Francis he had fired me, and Bill was embarrassed by this. So he asked me to come in and do a program, the program I'm about to do tonight. The music is even the same. The amazing thing was that I didn't even know where the studio was. I'd done this gig for 2 years before, but I didn't know where the studio was. All I did was send the invoice in at the end of each month. So I came into downtown Auckland and couldn't find Durham Street, which is where we were based at the time. I asked a whole lot of taxi drivers down the bottom end of Queen Street. They knew various streets in Calcutta, but they had no idea how to find their way around Auckland at all. They were all Indians or Pakistanis. So, right on 10 to 7, I managed to get in the building at Durham Street. There was a woman threw a rubbish bag out, and I didn't even have a slide to get in. And I went in, and my less charitable friends have said that rubbish went both ways that particular time. I ran up the stairs, and Andrew Topping was producing at that time. And I rushed into the room, and Andrew was on the phone. Sport wasn't a big gig for him at that time. And he was taking no notice, and I rushed into where the studio was, and I started to say, you know, tonight on the program I'll be talking to, and I went through it. And suddenly Andrew's eyes lit up, and he stopped talking on the telephone to whoever he was talking to and came rushing in. He said, listen, you silly bugger, you won't be talking to anybody because you don't even know how to turn on the microphone. And I didn't. And that, I think, is a comment on where we're at in broadcasting then and now. I don't think enough time is put into training people. You know, I look at young kids come in here and they're coming fresh out of broadcasting school, and somebody fires them in there and they expect them to be able to know what's going on, and there's buttons and everything all over the place and you haven't got a clue. I quickly took on board the fact that I didn't want to know anything about buttons. I wanted to know something about people, so I pretended right from day one to be absolutely hopeless technically. I am close to hopeless technically, but I am not nearly as bad as I've made it out, which always means that when I go to air, I've got good technical support.
And you've got a great producer, Helen, who...
Well, Helen produces at night, and she's been with me for 16 years, but Greg has been with me 23, and that's Saturday and Sunday, and Billings has been important in the development of the program. He used to call himself the world's, and he meant it, the world's greatest sports producer. We went through a patch, as I said, at the end of the 90s where people would come into New Zealand and they would be interviewed. And I was on top of my game in a big way with a tremendous amount of energy and a lot of hard work going into it. And they would come off the program in a small country like this, and they would come out and they would say to him, I don't believe that the way we've just been interviewed, that you people know so much about us. And we took great pride in that, great pride in it. And at that stage, I think that, you know, we set a benchmark which has been important, and hopefully it's something that people look at.